Now, there's some also other parts of the cells that we need to talk about because, you just don't have cells out there doing their own thing like we've talked about. There are cytoskeletons and other structures and matrices for the cells. So let's spend just a little bit of time in this section talking about these other structures. Now, between the nucleus and the plasma membrane of all eukaryotic cells is a system of interlinked protein filaments called the cytoskeleton that reinforces, organizes, and moves cell structures, and sometimes even the entire cell. Microtubules are long, hollow cylinders that consist of subunits of protein tubulins. These essentially serve as scaffolding for the cellular processes and can be rapidly assembled and disassembled when they are not needed. Well, they're rapidly assembled when they're needed and then disassembled when they're not needed. Such as when the cell's DNA needs to be replicated. These things can be whipped up and then broken down when the DNA does not need to be replicated. Otherwise, you just have all this junk just hanging around in the cell and it'd be in the way. Kind of like, when you get stuff piled up in the barn. But anyway, continuing on, microfilaments, are another one. Microfilaments are fibers that consist primarily of subunits of the globulin protein actin. So microfilaments are fibers that consist primarily of subunits of the globular protein actin. These fibers strengthen and change the shape of eukaryotic cells. Intermediate filaments form the framework that lends structure and strength to cells and tissues in multicellular organisms, such as the structure that you find in hair. Now, another one are motor proteins, and they're pretty much exactly what they sound like. They essentially allow the cell parts to move around when they're energized by ATP. Cilia are short hair-like structures that project from the surface of some cells and allows them some degree of motility. Basal bodies and pseudopods, or false feet, are two structures that also give the cells mobility. Pseudopods can also be used to engulf prey items, kind of like something from a horror movie, which is pretty cool. Now, a lot of cells secrete an extracellular matrix, so outside the cell, which is a complex mixture of molecules that often include a polysaccharide and fibrous proteins. The composition and function of this matrices, or this matrix, depends upon the cell that secretes it. Makes sense? Of the eukaryotes, protists, fungi, and plants have cell walls. These cell walls are typically permeable to water and substances dissolved in water. In plants, the cell wall secretes pectin and other polysaccharides onto the surface of the plasma membrane, which, along with the strands of cellulose, binds the cells together to form a primary wall, creating the external structure of the plants that we're often familiar with. This primary wall is flexible and allows plant cells to enlarge and change shape. Mature plants will secrete materials such as lignin on the primary wall's internal surface, making a firm secondary wall. Plants with lignified plant parts are more resistant to water, are stronger, and are less vulnerable to plant-attacking organisms when compared with younger plants. Now, animal cells have no cell walls, but some type of cells secrete an extracellular membrane called a basement membrane. Now, this is not a cell membrane because it is not composed of a lipid bilayer, but rather it is a sheet of fibrous material that structurally supports and organizes cells into tissues. Now, these structures can be soft, pliable structures, or they can be quite hard, such as like you would have with bone. Bone is an example of an extracellular matrix that is composed of the fibrous protein collagen and then is hardened by deposits of calcium and phosphorus, which of course is why we need calcium and phosphorus in our diet. A cuticle is a type of extracellular matrix secreted by cells at the body surface. So in plants, a cuticle of waxes and proteins help protect the cells from insects and rainwater. Crabs and spiders also have a cuticle composed primarily of chitin. Now, cells just don't sit side by side with each other, but rather they interact with each other using cell junctions. And these are structures that connect cells to other cells, pass materials between the cells, and help organize and stick the cells into extracellular matrix. Now, there are 3 common types of junctions in animal cells. You have tight junctions between plasma membranes of adjacent cells that prevent body fluids from seeping between the cells, such as what makes up the stomach lining and prevents the gastric acid from leaking through. You have adhering junctions, which fasten cells to each other and that lend strength to tissue and connect to the cytoskeleton elements in the cells, such as what you would find on the skin of an animal. And then finally, you have gap junctions, which are closable channels that connect the cytoplasm of adjoining animal cells. And these can open to permit water, ions, and small molecules to pass through from the cytoplasm of one cell to the cytoplasm of another. Now, in plants, we have open channels called plasmodesmata, which extend across plant cell walls to connect the cytoplasm of adjacent cells, allowing substances to flow from cell to cell. So these, and a lot of these extracellular matrices and parts and functions that we just discussed, hopefully start helping you make sense of how cells actually come together and start forming the various structures that we're probably more familiar with like skin and internal organs and so forth. Now, just to summarize, living cells at a minimum have plasma membranes, cytoplasm, and some DNA. So does that mean you can just put these substances together and you'll have life? No. So how is life defined? Well, typically life is defined as making use of the organic molecules of life, which consist of one or more cells, engage in self-sustaining biological processes such as metabolism and homeostasis, can change over their life by aging, maturing, and growing, use DNA as their hereditary material, and have the collective capacity to change or adapt over successive generations. But by understanding what cells are composed of, you will have a greater understanding of how cells are able to work together to form complex structures such as plants or animals.